Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, surrounded by people yet unseen, trapped in routines yet unfulfilled? What if the very thing you fear, disappearing, was actually the doorway to your transformation? What if vanishing from who you've been is the only way to meet who you're meant to become? Disappearing from distractions is one of the most powerful yet underrated skills a person can develop when they truly desire transformation. Because distractions are not just little interruptions in your day, they are thieves of your destiny. They are tiny cuts that bleed away your time, your focus, your energy, and your potential until you are left wondering why months and years have passed, but nothing has really changed in your life. And the truth is, most people don't fail because they don't have talent or because opportunities never come their way. They fail because they are too busy being entertained, too busy being caught in meaningless cycles of noise, too busy paying attention to things that don't add a single ounce of value to their future. And the sad reality is that we live in a world that glorifies distraction, a world that rewards short attention spans, that dangles endless content, endless scrolling, endless notifications, pulling you in 1,000 different directions until your mind is no longer your own. And if you want to truly transform, if you want to disappear from who you were and rise into who you were meant to be, you must first disappear from distractions. Think about it for a moment. How much of your day is truly spent on meaningful, intentional action toward your vision, and how much of it is scattered across screens, conversations, and habits that lead nowhere? Because distractions are not only about your phone, your social media, or the internet. They can also be people, environments, and even your own thought patterns. And unless you make the radical decision to step back, to withdraw, to cut ties with the things that consume your attention without feeding your spirit, you will stay locked in the same cycle of almost becoming, almost starting, almost finishing, and almost living the life you desire. And there is nothing more dangerous than living in the land of almost. Disappearing from distractions is not about losing yourself, it is about finding yourself in the silence, in the clarity, in the space where your thoughts can actually breathe and align with your vision. When you disappear from distractions, you are not simply avoiding noise. You are reclaiming your power, because every notification, every gossip-filled conversation, every toxic person, every meaningless television show you binge is a withdrawal from the bank account of your future. And every time you choose to step away, every time you choose silence over noise, every time you choose solitude over chaos, you are making a deposit into that account, building compound interest in the form of focus, discipline, creativity, and strength. Transformation requires deep concentration, and deep concentration cannot survive in a distracted life, which is why so many people talk about change, but never actually achieve it, because their attention is too fragmented to sustain the level of discipline it takes to create something extraordinary. And the world will not hand you focus. You have to create it by forcefully disappearing from the very things that are stealing it from you. The difficulty of disappearing from distractions lies in the fact that distractions often feel good. They give you quick dopamine hits. They trick you into feeling busy, feeling entertained, feeling engaged, but none of that equates to progress, none of that equates to growth. And if you are not careful, you will trade the fulfillment of your vision for the fleeting pleasure of scrolling, clicking, gossiping, and consuming. That is why disappearing must be intentional. It is not something you stumble into, it is something you decide, it is something you enforce, because the world will not encourage you to disconnect. The world will pressure you to stay online, to stay available, to stay plugged into everything except your purpose. But you must rise above that pressure and protect your mind as if your life depends on it, because it does. The moment you begin to disappear from distractions, something powerful happens. You start to hear yourself again, you start to recognize your own thoughts, you start to notice how much mental clutter you had been carrying without even realizing it. And in that quiet space, creativity begins to flow, clarity begins to sharpen, discipline begins to grow, and suddenly, instead of constantly reacting to life, you begin to direct it. You begin to wake up with intention. You begin to design your days instead of letting your days design you, and that shift, though it may seem small at first, compounds into massive transformation over time, because clarity produces confidence, confidence fuels action, and consistent action shapes a brand new version of yourself. But it all begins with the courage to step back, the courage to unplug, the courage to disappear from everything and everyone that does not align with the person you are becoming. You must realize that distractions are not neutral, they are destructive, they are not harmless time fillers, they are forces pulling you away from the life you were created to live. And every time you give in, every time you allow yourself to be consumed, you are sacrificing a piece of your potential. The person who disappears from distractions is the person who wins, because while everyone else is busy watching, comparing, scrolling, and consuming, you are busy building, creating, learning, and transforming, and when the results begin to show, those same people who once mocked your silence, who once criticized your absence, will be the same people who marvel at your growth, asking how you did it. And the answer will be simple. You disappeared from distractions so you could finally reappear as the person you were destined to be. The power of isolation is one of the most misunderstood and undervalued forces in personal transformation, because most people are conditioned to believe that being surrounded by others is the key to success, that constant social interaction means you are progressing, that filling your calendar with events, calls, and connections is proof that you are moving forward. But the truth is that the most important breakthroughs in life almost never happen in a crowded room. They happen in silence, in stillness, in the quiet corners where no one is watching, no one is applauding, and no one is validating you, because it is in those isolated moments that you are forced to confront yourself, to strip away the noise, and to listen deeply to the voice inside that has been drowned out for years by distractions and external influences. People fear isolation because they mistake it for loneliness, but there is a vast difference between being lonely and being alone. Loneliness is emptiness, a craving for something outside to fill you, but solitude is fullness, a conscious decision to step back, to retreat, to recharge, and to rebuild your strength so you can return to the world with clarity and power. Isolation is where the raw work of transformation takes place, because when you are surrounded by others, no matter how much you love them, no matter how much they care, there are always expectations, opinions, and projections being placed upon you. There is always subtle pressure to act a certain way, to maintain a certain identity, to keep showing up as the person they think you are. But when you withdraw into isolation, those external voices fade, and the only voice left is yours. And while that can be uncomfortable at first, it is in that discomfort that true growth begins, because you are finally forced to face the reality of your thoughts, your fears, your dreams, and your desires without any filters. It is in isolation that you realize how many of your decisions were made to please others, how much of your life was designed to fit in rather than to stand out, and that awareness becomes the foundation for authentic transformation. Because you cannot build the future version of yourself on a blueprint handed to you by society, you can only build it on the blueprint that comes from within. Isolation is powerful because it strips away the unnecessary and magnifies what is essential. When you are alone, you begin to see what truly matters. You begin to distinguish between noise and signal, between what feels urgent and what is actually important, and in that stripped-down state you gain the ability to prioritize, to focus, to cut through the illusions and see clearly the path that is meant for you. That kind of clarity is impossible to achieve when you are constantly surrounded by opinions, entertainment, or distractions, because your mind is never given the chance to settle. It is always reacting instead of reflecting. But in solitude the mind slows down, it breathes, it expands, and it begins to create. Some of the greatest ideas, inventions, and breakthroughs in history were born in moments of isolation, not in crowded gatherings, but in quiet retreats where individuals dared to step away long enough to hear their own genius speaking. The power of isolation also lies in the discipline it demands, because to be alone requires strength. It requires the courage to break away from the herd, to endure the silence, to resist the urge to run back to comfort. And that very discipline becomes a muscle that shapes you for the rest of your journey. When you train yourself to thrive in isolation, You become untouchable by the pressures of the world. Because you no longer need external validation to feel worthy, you no longer need constant company to feel secure, you no longer need to be seen to feel significant. You carry your value within yourself, and that makes you dangerous in the best way, because the person who is content in solitude is the person who cannot be manipulated, cannot be distracted, and cannot be easily broken. Isolation is not about cutting people off forever. It is about stepping away long enough to redefine yourself so that when you do return, you return as a stronger, clearer, and more powerful version of yourself. It is the cocoon that precedes the butterfly, the soil that nurtures the seed, the training ground that equips the warrior. Without that period of being unseen, of being hidden, of being misunderstood, the transformation would never be complete. People may look at you during that time and wonder why you are so distant, why you are so quiet, why you seem to have vanished. But what they cannot see is the work being done in silence, the battles being fought in your mind, the breakthroughs happening in your spirit, and one day, when you emerge, they will see the evidence. They will see the transformation, and they will finally understand that it was isolation that gave birth to the strength they now admire. The truth is, isolation reveals you to yourself. It shows you who you are when no one is looking, when there is no applause, when there is no recognition. And that raw encounter with your authentic self is what gives you the power to build a new identity from the inside out. Without isolation, you risk building a life that looks good to others but feels empty to you, but with isolation, you gain the chance to design a life that feels aligned, a life that resonates with your purpose, a life that is unshakable, because it was forged in the quiet fire of solitude. That is why the power of isolation is not something to fear, but something to embrace, because it is not the absence of connection, it is the presence of clarity, discipline, and transformation, and the person who learns to harness it will always rise above the noise of the world. Shedding old identities is one of the hardest but most necessary parts of transformation, because before you can step into who you are meant to become, you must be willing to release who you used to be, and that is never easy since your old identity feels familiar, safe, and comfortable even if it no longer serves you. People hold on to identities the same way they hold on to old clothes that don't fit anymore, because they feel attached, because those clothes carry memories, because letting go feels like losing a piece of themselves. But transformation demands sacrifice, and the first thing you must sacrifice is the version of yourself that was built on limitations, fear, approval seeking, and old stories that no longer reflect the person you are becoming. If you cling to an outdated identity, you remain trapped in the same cycles, replaying the same mistakes, stuck in the same comfort zones, and no matter how much you dream, plan, or pray for change, nothing will shift until you are willing to shed the skin of your past. An identity is not just who you are, it is also who you believe yourself to be, and most of that belief is built from the voices of others, the environments you grew up in, the labels you were given, and the roles you were forced to play. Maybe you were told you are shy, so you built an identity around silence. Maybe you were told you are not smart, so you lived life believing you could never achieve greatness. Maybe you were told you are average, so you stopped aiming higher because you didn't want to prove anyone wrong. These old identities become cages, invisible prisons that trap you inside stories you never chose. And the problem with cages is that even when the door is open, most people never leave because they have convinced themselves that the cage is who they are. Shedding old identities means having the courage to step out of that cage, to reject the labels, to discard the roles, and to rewrite the story of who you truly are. The process of shedding is uncomfortable because identity is tied to ego, and ego resists change at all costs. Your ego wants you to stay consistent with who you were yesterday because consistency feels safe, even if it is suffocating. That is why when you try to change, when you try to rise, when you try to step into a bigger version of yourself, you feel internal resistance, self-doubt, fear, and even guilt. Because the old identity is fighting for survival, you might hear a voice in your head that says, "Who do you think you are to do this? That's not who you are. That's not how people know you." But those voices are not truth, they are echoes of the old self desperately trying to hold on, and you must be willing to silence them, to walk through that discomfort, and to remind yourself that transformation requires death before it can bring new life. The old you has to die for the new you to live. Shedding old identities also means letting go of the people, places, and patterns that reinforce them. If your identity was built on being the people pleaser, you will have to let go of environments where you are constantly expected to sacrifice your dreams for others. If your identity was built on being the underachiever, you will have to stop surrounding yourself with people who settle, who mock ambition, and who celebrate mediocrity. If your identity was built on being the victim, you will have to stop feeding off sympathy and instead start taking responsibility for your life. Every old identity is tied to habits, to communities, to stories you tell yourself daily, and to shed it, you must release not just the thought, but also the structures that sustain it. This is why transformation feels lonely, because shedding often means leaving behind people who only knew the old version of you, and their discomfort with your growth can tempt you to shrink back into old patterns. But you must remember that your future is more important than their comfort. The beauty of shedding old identities is that it creates space for new ones. Think of a snake shedding its skin. It is not dying, it is growing. The old skin cannot contain the new size, the new strength, the new growth, so it must be released. In the same way, your old identity cannot contain the future you. You are meant to expand, to grow, to evolve, and every season of your life requires a new version of you to rise. The identity that served you in the past may not serve you now. The mindset that kept you alive in survival may not help you thrive in success. The habits that fit the old you may suffocate the new you. To grow, you must release, and the act of shedding is what makes space for expansion. It is important to understand that shedding old identities is not about rejecting your past or hating who you once were. It is about honoring that version of yourself for getting you this far, but refusing to let it keep you from going further. You can be grateful for the lessons, grateful for the experiences, grateful for the survival, but still accept that the old you is not enough for the journey ahead. You cannot carry the same insecurities, the same fears, the same excuses, and expect to walk into a destiny that demands strength, courage, and discipline. Shedding is not betrayal, it is alignment. It is the ultimate act of self-respect, because you are refusing to let your old self rob your future self of what it deserves. The most liberating part of shedding old identities is the realization that you are not fixed, you are not stuck, you are not defined by the person you used to be. You are fluid, you are evolving, you are capable of rebirth as many times as it takes to reach your highest potential. Every time you shed, you prove to yourself that you are not your past, you are not your mistakes, you are not your old labels, you are not the person others told you to be, you are whoever you choose to become next. And in that realization, you unlock the freedom to continually grow, to continually expand, to continually evolve, until you are living as the fullest, truest version of yourself. Transforming in the dark is where the deepest and most authentic growth of your life takes place. Because real transformation does not happen when the world is clapping for you, when the cameras are rolling, or when the spotlight is on your every move. It happens in the unseen hours, in the quiet mornings when no one is awake to notice, in the long nights when you are fighting battles that no one even knows exist, and in the silent moments where you are tempted to quit, but choose instead to take one more step. The darkness is not glamorous, it is not celebrated, and it is not comfortable. But it is necessary, because the dark is where you are tested, stripped, and rebuilt in ways that cannot happen in the light. People admire success, but they rarely admire the process, because the process is messy, lonely, and unpolished. Yet without embracing that process in the dark, the transformation that everyone sees in the light would never exist. The darkness of transformation is not just a physical state, but an emotional and mental one, because it represents the seasons of life where you feel hidden, overlooked, forgotten, and even misunderstood. You may feel like no one sees your effort, like your sacrifices are invisible, like your pain goes unnoticed. But those are the exact conditions that produce resilience and strength. When you keep going in the dark without recognition, you are building discipline. When you stay committed without applause, you are building character. When you sacrifice without being celebrated, you are proving to yourself that your transformation is real and not just a performance for others to admire. The darkness removes the audience, and when the audience is gone, the only person left to impress is yourself, and that is the most important audience you will ever face. Think of how nature works. A seed is buried in the soil, hidden away from the world, pressed down in the darkness before it can break through the surface and reach for the sun. If you dug it up too early, if you forced it into the light before it was ready, it would never survive, because its strength, its roots, and its foundation are built in the dark. In the same way, your transformation cannot be rushed or constantly broadcasted, because the dark is where you build the foundation that will hold the weight of your future. Without the hidden work, the public victory will collapse, because a structure without a foundation cannot stand, and the foundation of every transformation is laid in the dark. The reason many people never fully transform is because they resist the dark seasons. They want the results without the hidden process. They want the recognition without the discipline. They want the applause without the silence, but life doesn't work that way. The dark is not a punishment, it is preparation. It is the refining ground where the unnecessary is burned away, where weaknesses are exposed and strengthened, where distractions are removed, and where your focus is sharpened. You may feel like you are being buried, but in reality you are being planted. You may feel like you are being forgotten, but in reality you are being prepared. You may feel like you are being delayed, but in reality you are being developed. That perspective is what allows you to embrace the dark instead of resisting it. Transforming in the dark also demands honesty, because when no one is watching, there is no room for pretending, no stage to perform on, no mask to wear. You are left with yourself, your flaws, your fears, your weaknesses, and your doubts, and it is in that raw state that real transformation begins. Anyone can act disciplined in front of others, anyone can act confident when the world is cheering, but who you are when no one is watching is the truest reflection of your transformation. The dark reveals whether your growth is real or just rehearsed. It reveals whether your vision is rooted in purpose or just in performance. It reveals whether you are willing to push forward not because of external pressure, but because of internal conviction. That is why the dark is a gift, because it strips away the superficial and forces you to build something real. When you transform in the dark, you are not only changing your habits, you are changing your identity. You are proving to yourself that you are capable of more than you thought, that you can endure more than you believed, that you can remain consistent even when motivation fades. Every early morning you wake up to work on your dream without telling anyone, every workout you complete without posting it, every book you read in silence, every plan you draft in solitude, these are the bricks of transformation that no one sees, but that everyone will one day notice when you step into the light. What people call overnight success is nothing more than years of dark, hidden transformation finally breaking through the surface. The dark is also where patience is tested, because transformation is not instant, it is a slow, grueling process that requires endurance. You may not see results for months, you may question if your effort is even working, you may feel like giving up because the evidence of change is not visible yet, but that is exactly why the dark is necessary. It teaches you to keep moving even when there is no immediate reward, to keep building even when there is no immediate return, to keep believing even when there is no immediate proof. That ability to persist without visible progress is what separates those who transform from those who only dream of transformation. Ultimately, transforming in the dark is about trusting the process more than the outcome. It is about believing that the work you do in silence will one day speak for itself, that the sacrifices you make in private will one day produce rewards in public, that the pain you endure unseen will one day fuel a strength that everyone can see. It is about letting go of the need to prove yourself instantly and instead allowing yourself to grow steadily. The dark may not feel comfortable, it may not feel rewarding, but it is where you become unshakable. Because when you learn to thrive in the unseen, when you learn to grow without applause, when you learn to persist without recognition, nothing and no one can stop the person you are becoming. Rebuilding with intention is the stage of transformation where you move from breaking down the old to consciously constructing the new, because it is not enough to simply shed old identities, disappear from distractions, or endure the dark seasons of growth. If you do not deliberately design who you want to become, you will unconsciously drift back into who you once were. Too many people believe that change happens automatically, that once they let go of the past, the future will magically shape itself, but the truth is growth without direction is chaos, and chaos never creates lasting transformation. To rebuild with intention means to carefully, thoughtfully, and deliberately decide what kind of person you want to be, what kind of life you want to live, what values will anchor you, what habits will define you, and what standards will guide you. It is about becoming the architect of your own existence instead of a tenant renting space in someone else's vision. When you rebuild with intention, you take back control over your narrative because most of your old identity was shaped unintentionally. It was built by the environment you grew up in, by the expectations of your family, by the opinions of your peers, and by the circumstances you were thrown into. You did not choose it, it was chosen for you, and you simply wore it like a costume for years. Rebuilding with intention means ripping up that old script and writing your own, one that reflects your true values, your true passions, your true mission. It means asking yourself the deep questions: who do I want to be? What legacy do I want to leave? What habits must I adopt to align with that vision? What behaviors must I cut off? Without intentional rebuilding, you risk recreating the same patterns in different forms, dressing the old self in new clothes, but never actually becoming new. The process of rebuilding requires clarity, and clarity begins with vision. You cannot rebuild effectively if you do not know what you are building toward. Just as a builder does not start laying bricks without a blueprint, you cannot expect to become your highest self without first envisioning what that highest self looks like. That vision must be specific, vivid, and compelling enough to pull you forward when motivation runs low. It is not enough to say, "I want to be successful." You must define what success looks like for you. Is it financial freedom? Is it physical health? Is it peace of mind? Is it influence and impact? Once you define it, you can align your actions to that vision, and every choice you make becomes a brick laid toward the foundation of your new self. Rebuilding with intention also requires discipline, because creating a new identity is not about one big decision, it is about thousands of small, daily choices that align with the person you want to become. Every time you choose to wake up early instead of sleeping in, you are rebuilding. Every time you choose to read a book instead of wasting hours on distractions, you are rebuilding. Every time you choose to walk away from an environment that no longer serves you, you are rebuilding. Every intentional choice is a vote for the new self, and those votes add up until the old self no longer has power. Transformation is not about a single breakthrough moment. It is about consistent intentional actions that, over time, solidify into a new way of being. But rebuilding with intention is not just about what you add, it is also about what you refuse to allow back into your life. If you leave cracks in your foundation, the old self will creep back in. That means setting boundaries with people who only recognize the outdated version of you, saying no to habits that once held you back, and refusing to compromise on your new standards even when it is inconvenient. Rebuilding requires protecting your growth as fiercely as you pursued it, because without protection, your intentional design will be eroded by the pressures of the world. Guard your time, guard your energy, guard your environment, because these are the building blocks of your new life. And if they are not defended, they will be stolen. One of the most powerful aspects of rebuilding with intention is the awareness that you are not just changing your life. You are influencing everyone connected to you. When you rebuild yourself, you shift the energy of your family, your friends, your community. You become an example of what is possible, proof that transformation is real, inspiration for those still stuck in their old selves. This is why rebuilding with intention matters so much, because your transformation is not just about you, it is about the ripple effect it creates, the way your courage to design a new life empowers others to believe they can do the same. You may not realize it now, but someone is watching your rebuilding process, and your discipline, your intentionality, your growth is silently giving them permission to rise as well. Rebuilding with intention is also about aligning your actions with your values. Too many people build lives that look impressive but feel empty because they rebuilt around external validation instead of internal alignment. True rebuilding asks, what do I value most? Freedom, integrity, growth, contribution. Once you identify those values, you must structure your habits, relationships, and choices to reflect them. If you value freedom, but you build a life chained to debt and distractions, you are not living intentionally. If you value integrity, but you compromise your character to impress others, you are not living intentionally. Rebuilding with intention means that every brick, every beam, every choice in your life is in harmony with the values you claim, and that harmony is what creates fulfillment, not just success. Finally, rebuilding with intention requires patience, because transformation is a process, not an event. Just as a building takes time to construct, your new identity takes time to solidify. There will be days when progress feels invisible, when the work feels heavy, when doubt creeps in. But those are the days where intention matters most. If you keep laying bricks consistently, one by one, even when it feels slow, eventually the structure of your new life will stand tall for everyone to see. The old you will no longer fit, because the new you has been built with such intention, such clarity, and such discipline that there is no going back, only forward. Emerging unrecognizable is the stage of transformation that shocks not only the world around you but also yourself. Because when you have gone through the process of disappearing from distractions, isolating yourself for growth, shedding old identities, transforming in the dark, and rebuilding with intention, the result is a version of you that is so different from your past that people cannot connect who you are now with who you once were. This stage is powerful, but it is also unsettling for others, because people love the version of you they have grown used to, the one that fit neatly into their expectations, the one that made them comfortable. And when you emerge unrecognizable, you force them to confront not only your growth but also their lack of it. Emerging unrecognizable is not about changing for the sake of appearances. It is about embodying the growth, discipline, and transformation you worked for in silence, and when it manifests outwardly, it creates an undeniable shift that others cannot ignore. When you emerge unrecognizable, the first reaction from people will often be resistance. They may question you, doubt you, even criticize you, because your transformation disrupts their comfort zone. They were used to you being available for their distractions, their gossip, their expectations. They were used to you playing small, settling, doubting yourself, and living beneath your potential. Now that you have elevated, they may not know how to relate to you, and instead of celebrating, they may try to pull you back into the old patterns where they felt secure. This is why so many people sabotage their own growth. They cannot handle the friction of becoming unrecognizable to those they love. But if you are serious about transformation, you must accept that not everyone will understand, not everyone will applaud, and not everyone will walk with you into your new season. Because your emergence is not meant for their approval, it is meant for your destiny. Emerging unrecognizable also means you start to see yourself differently. For so long, you may have carried old labels, old limitations, and old beliefs about who you are. You may have doubted your potential, second-guessed your abilities, and settled for less than you deserve. But when you have done the inner work in silence, when you have rebuilt yourself with intention, and when you begin to see the results of your discipline, you shock yourself. You look in the mirror and no longer see the timid, uncertain, distracted version of you. You see strength, focus, clarity, and confidence staring back. You hear your own voice speaking with conviction, and you realize you are no longer the person who hesitated, who delayed, who waited for permission. Emerging unrecognizable means you begin to witness the fruit of your labor in real time, and that realization creates a new level of self-respect and belief that cannot be shaken. The unrecognizable version of you is not only different in appearance or habits, but also in energy. People can feel it when you walk into a room. The way you carry yourself changes. The way you speak changes. The way you set boundaries changes. The way you pursue your goals changes. You no longer move with desperation or insecurity. You move with certainty and authority. You no longer waste time defending your choices. You simply live them out. You no longer beg for recognition. Your results speak louder than any words. This energy is magnetic, and it attracts new opportunities, new relationships, and new levels of success that were invisible to you when you were stuck in your old identity. Emerging unrecognizable positions you to step into rooms you once thought were beyond your reach, because your transformation has elevated your capacity to operate at higher levels. What makes this stage so profound is that it redefines your entire narrative. People will say, "I can't believe this is the same person I used to know." They will compare the old you with the new you and realize the gap is so wide that it almost feels like you've lived two different lives. That is the proof of transformation. The habits you once struggled with no longer tempt you. The environments you once tolerated no longer appeal to you. The excuses you once clung to no longer hold any power. You are not pretending to be someone else. You are finally embodying the person you were always meant to be, and to the world, that looks unrecognizable, but to your spirit it feels inevitable. However, emerging unrecognizable is not only about the way others perceive you, it is also about how you choose to carry this new version of yourself. Some people, when they change, use their growth to belittle others or to seek revenge against those who doubted them. But true transformation is not fueled by bitterness, it is fueled by purpose. The unrecognizable version of you does not waste energy proving people wrong. It focuses on proving yourself right. It does not chase applause, it chases alignment. It does not seek validation, it seeks impact. Emerging unrecognizable is not about flaunting who you have become. It is about living so fully in your purpose that you don't need to explain your growth to anyone. This stage also comes with responsibility, because being unrecognizable means you are now an example. People who once dismissed you may now look to you for guidance. People who once overlooked you may now draw inspiration from your journey. People who once doubted you may now seek your wisdom. Emerging unrecognizable positions you as a leader, whether you wanted it or not, because transformation is contagious, and your life becomes evidence of what is possible when someone dares to disappear, rebuild, and rise. The responsibility is to continue growing, to never settle, to remain disciplined, and to protect the identity you worked so hard to build. The most rewarding part of emerging unrecognizable is the freedom it brings. You are no longer bound by the past, no longer trapped by old roles, no longer weighed down by the expectations of others. You are free to live authentically, to create boldly, to pursue fearlessly, and to dream without limits. You realize that the old you was just a shadow, a fragment of what was possible, and now you are living in the fullness of your potential. That freedom cannot be explained to those who have not experienced it. It can only be felt, lived, and expressed through the way you carry yourself and the way you chase your destiny. Sustaining the transformation is often the most difficult and most overlooked part of the entire journey, because while disappearing, isolating, shedding, transforming, rebuilding, and emerging feel like dramatic, powerful, and even exciting stages, the truth is that maintaining that new level of growth requires consistency, patience, and vigilance that many people underestimate. It is one thing to break free from old habits, but it is another thing to protect yourself from slipping back into them once you've tasted freedom. It is one thing to create a new identity, but it is another thing to carry that identity forward every single day, especially when life pressures, old environments, and past influences attempt to pull you back into what feels familiar. Sustaining the transformation is about building guardrails around your growth, ensuring that the work you have done in silence is not lost in moments of carelessness, fatigue, or temptation. It requires you to live deliberately, not casually, because the same old distractions that once held you captive will circle back around to test whether you are truly committed to the new version of yourself. When you reach the stage of sustaining transformation, the danger lies not in obvious failures but in subtle compromises. You may feel strong enough to revisit environments you left behind, but in doing so, you open the door for old habits to creep back in. You may feel confident enough to entertain people you cut off during your rebuilding season, but in doing so, you risk being pulled back into cycles of negativity or complacency. Sustaining transformation requires you to be brutally honest with yourself about the spaces, people, and habits that do not serve the life you are building, and to maintain the courage to keep those doors closed even when nostalgia or loneliness tempts you to reopen them. True sustainability is not about proving how much you can handle. It is about protecting the vision you fought for and prioritizing the discipline that created your growth in the first place. Another aspect of sustaining transformation is the constant renewal of your mind. Growth is not a one-time decision, it is a daily practice. The mind, left unguarded, will drift back into comfort, into fear, into doubt, because that is where it feels safe. This is why daily rituals, affirmations, intentional learning, and consistent self-reflection are vital. You cannot rely on yesterday's victories to carry today's battles. Sustaining transformation means feeding your mind with inspiration, with challenges, with knowledge, and with discipline every day, so that the foundation you built does not weaken under the weight of life's pressures. The habits that helped you transform must not be abandoned just because you feel you have arrived, because the moment you stop feeding your growth is the moment it begins to starve. One of the greatest challenges in sustaining transformation is dealing with the perception of others. When you emerge unrecognizable, people will test you. Some will doubt whether your change is real or temporary. Others will deliberately provoke you to see if the old version of you still exists. Sustaining transformation requires you to hold your ground, to resist the urge to prove yourself to anyone, and to remain steady even when others question your authenticity. You must realize that your transformation is not for their approval, and sustaining it means not allowing their skepticism or criticism to drag you back into patterns of insecurity. The old you would have tried to explain or defend, but the transformed you understands that consistency over time is the only answer needed. Sustaining transformation also requires adapting to new challenges that come with growth. The habits that worked in your old season may not be enough to carry you in your new one. For example, the level of discipline required to rise from mediocrity to stability is different from the discipline required to rise from stability to excellence. As you grow, your challenges evolve, your responsibilities expand, and your vision stretches wider. Sustaining transformation means upgrading your systems, your routines, and your mindset to meet the demands of your next level, because what got you here will not always get you there. This adaptability ensures that your transformation is not stagnant, but continually evolving, expanding, and deepening over time. Another critical factor in sustaining transformation is accountability. Growth thrives in environments of discipline, but it can crumble in isolation if there are no structures in place to keep you aligned with your goals. Having accountability, whether it's mentors, trusted friends, coaches, or even systems you design for yourself, ensures that you remain consistent when motivation fades. Accountability acts as a mirror, reminding you of the standards you set, pushing you to remain disciplined, and challenging you when you begin to drift. Sustaining transformation is not about perfection, but about persistence, and accountability creates the support system needed to keep pressing forward even when you feel weak. The final piece of sustaining transformation lies in service and purpose. When your growth is only about yourself, it becomes easy to lose momentum once you achieve a certain level of comfort. But when your transformation is tied to a larger purpose, to serving others, to impacting lives beyond your own, the fire within you stays alive. Sustaining transformation requires a shift from self-centered growth to mission-driven growth. Because the moment you realize your transformation has the power to inspire others, you begin to carry it not as a burden but as a responsibility. The desire to remain aligned, consistent, and disciplined is fueled by the awareness that others are watching, learning, and being impacted by the way you live your life.